Welcome to Common Ground with Bill Walton, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
What should politics be about, but isn't? One of my guests today, Ralph Benko, wrote recently in Forbes about the Declaration of Independence and its claim that the pursuit of happiness is an inalienable right. For most people today, the word happiness conjures up pleasant, positive emotions and having needs satisfied, whereas in 1776, the common meaning was prosperity, thriving, well-being. Today, this pursuit of happiness has nearly dropped out of our political discourse. Politics has become largely an exercise in misery and devolved mostly into a fight over property and what constitutes justice, rather than a spirited competition for the pursuit of happiness. This is a great pity. Yet, we have had among us a politician who did fight for the pursuit of happiness. Jack Kemp. Jack, who died in 2009, would have been 82 today, July 13th. Our politics sorely miss him. Jack was also a legendary professional football quarterback who believed that sports were a microcosm of our society and our competitive way of life, and that the spirit of competition leads to productivity and human flourishing. But to him, sports were not about rugged individualism. Sports require cooperation and collaboration. Both the weak and the strong can succeed. We are lifted up not only by our own efforts, but by the inspiration and help we receive from the highest achievers. With us today to talk about what Jack Kemp meant to American politics and also what we can do to reset our political compass toward the pursuit of happiness are Jack's son, Jimmy Kemp, and the distinguished original thinker, Ralph Benko. Jimmy Kemp is president of the Jack Kemp Foundation, the managing partner of Kemp Partners, a strategic consulting firm based in Washington, and the founding board chairman for the Hope Community Charter School. The Jack Kemp Foundation's mission is to develop, engage, and recognize exceptional leaders who champion the American idea, beginning with the premise that the condition of your birth should not determine the outcome of your life. Jimmy played 8 seasons as a quarterback in the Canadian Football League, retiring in 2001 from the Toronto Argonauts. Jimmy, welcome.
Thanks, Bill.
Ralph Benko, my frequent guest, is the author of the Webster's Dictionary, How to Use the Web to Transform the World, and also the 21st Century Gold Standard for Prosperity, Security, and Liberty. Among his many endeavors, he's editor-in-chief of the Supply Side blog, a weekly contributor to Forge.com, and is the president of the Alinsky Center. He served in the Reagan White House and was a principal agent in the George W. Bush's administration Human Trafficking Victim Rescue Project. Ralph, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Jimmy, tell us a bit about Jack.
Well, as you said, today, July 13th, is my dad's birthday. He was born in 1935 in Los Angeles, California, to Paul and Frances Kemp. My dad was the third of 4 Kemp boys and grew up in a rambunctious household where sports was the language that was spoken. The other language that was spoken was entrepreneurship. My dad's father, my grandfather, Paul Kemp, started an audaciously named company that was a delivery service, which started with 1 motorcycle. He and his brother...
Small packages, I presume.
Small packages. They had 1 motorcycle, and they called it the California Delivery Service.
Okay.
In Los Angeles.
That's pretty audacious.
They grew in during the course of my dad's formative years. They grew to have about 10 trucks and about that many drivers. My dad's one of his summer jobs was driving a truck, and the story goes that on one of his final days of work, he was backing up a truck and backed it right up into the client's brick warehouse. And that was the last time that he drove a truck.
It was time he was requested to go take up football? Or
Correct. I believe so. So my dad would have been 82 today. He passed away, as you said, in 2009. And he's inspired so many people, Bill, certainly myself and my three siblings, who he loved very well, always encouraging us to be a leader. We never left the house when Dad was there without him saying, hey, be a leader. He was a great encourager for each of us. But as the president of the Jack Kemp Foundation, it's very common for people to come up to me and say, Jimmy, I just have to tell you, your dad helped get me into politics. He's the reason why I wanted to go into public service.
He made it a positive rather than a negative.
And so the way we describe it is that Dad practiced the politics of optimism. He was eternally optimistic, and that fits perfectly with the founders' intent for this country, that there are inalienable rights, as you're talking about, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when you think of our political climate today, I don't think that we should be so discouraged. Is it bad? Does it get ugly? Yes, it does. Have we had an unprecedented election? Yes, we have. But that's not unique in our history. And when you look around the world at the political situations that people have been in, we still have an incredible opportunity, and there are a lot of exciting opportunities on the horizon. And we need political leaders who can stand up and say what is possible and remind people that there's common ground, as you talk about in the name of this show. There's common ground where people can come together and really make progress on issues that have a huge impact on people's ability to flourish.
Ralph, you're writing about this as we speak, about pursuit of happiness, human flourishing, and what Jack Kemp meant to it. Share your thoughts.
Yeah, well, in my column at Forbes.com today, it's all about Happy Birthday, Jack Kemp.
Thank you.
The man who transformed the world. And you can just Google Ralph Benko, Jack Kemp, Happy Birthday, and it'll pop up. What I point out, getting sort of here as I am perched on the precipice of eternity, I remember more things than many upcoming young tigers. And I go into the backstory, which I won't do here, but Jack Kemp persuaded Ronald Reagan to run on what was considered to be a heretical by the Green Eye-Shade Republicans, and a nutty idea by the neo-Keynesian Democrats of stabilizing the dollar, restoring the dollar to high integrity, which we knew how to do, but Jimmy Carter couldn't figure it out, and cutting marginal tax rates across the board for everyone by 30%. And what people fail to remember is after Kemp handed this off to Reagan, who agreed to put this as part of his policy, and then shortly after Reagan, or shortly around that time, Reagan announced for president in November of 1979. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on that day was 814. No missing commas. It's now over 21,000. The world wealth, the world GDP was $11 trillion. It's now, according to the World Bank, $75 trillion. That didn't happen by accident. We were facing a world of poverty and misery, and America with a misery index over 20%.
Misery index being what? Inflation plus unemployment?
Inflation plus unemployment and another couple of variables.
Yeah.
It was worse than it is today. And as much as Bill Buckley liked to brag that the National Review was about standing athwart history, yelling stop, Jack Kemp was talking about taking history in his hands and saying start. He was an outlier. And I refer to him in the column as the whole Wizard of Oz package. Brains, heart, and courage. He took this soggy system and he redirected it 180 degrees from misery to prosperity and human flourishing. And he's never gotten enough credit. That's not a problem for him. It's a problem for us because there's an example there to follow.
So what were the predicates? The taxes? Well, you also had a tremendous optimism about including everybody. I mean, it was not just, I think there's this view that we've got the elites in America now and then everybody else. And I think that would not be his view. I mean, it's not just the 1%, but there's an elite, a group of elites that are the issue that are both Republican and Democrat.
Well, that's why tax reform is so important. Getting a simple tax code that doesn't privilege the wealthy and people who can figure out, can hire the advisors to guide them to make the right decisions. Dad was always in favor of a simple tax code, and you have many people who believe in that view in our leadership today.
Yeah, the tax code is manifestly biased towards people with resources who can figure out how to work it.
Absolutely,
and leaves everybody else out.
And the class warfare approach on this issue is wrong. And the goal is not to cut taxes for the wealthy. The goal is to get to the right tax rate that maximizes the dynamic energy of people, regardless of what socioeconomic status they're in, because the tax code should unleash the greatest capital that anybody has, the ideas that they have to serve others. And that's where free enterprise is so powerful. And our founding fathers understood it. And I agree, Ralph, that my dad was a unique person who had a radical idea. But remember that the word radical means getting back to the foundation, to the principles. And that's why I agree and like your use of the word radical. But I think all of this is important. And when you talk about human flourishing, that's also a really important part of it.
So what are the predicates of pursuit of happiness, Ralph, or what are the elements? I mean, and how does that apply to 2017 and where we are? I mean, what would we do if we wanted to set a set of policy initiatives that would bring that about?
I have a few favorites, but I'm not really all that interested in that. My favorite is my first favorite is Jack Kemp's Unfinished Symphony, the classical gold standard. The Mundell-Laffer hypothesis, which was his playbook, was mostly about restoring good money, high quality, high integrity monetary policy, with a powerful reference to the gold standard. He introduced the Gold Standard Act of 1984. That said, we have new problems today. The problems that he solved were stagflation. He laid out the blueprint for how to end inflation, which Volcker followed, and how to unleash growth, and how to cut the top tax rate from 70% ultimately down to 28%, which was dramatic. I'm more interested in finding new leadership right now. Yes, the gold standard, and yes, the Lausen plan to solve the unfunded public employee pension crisis, and yes, John Tamny's talent trumps taxes, and yes, Senator Lee's social capital. Yes, there are plenty of good ideas out there, but there's no leader. There's no one right now who has stepped forward like Jack Kemp to say, we are going to figure out, based upon what's tried and true, how to get economic growth to 4%, because that is the game changer. So I, like Diogenes and his lantern in search of an honest man, I'm in search of the next Kemp, the person who will take a stand, an unshakable stand, an unstoppable stand for general equitable prosperity. Without a quarterback, Bill, it doesn't matter how great your playbook is. You don't have a team, and a team needs to build around a quarterback. I am looking for the next Kemp.
Jimmy, any suggestions for Ralph? Who this quarterback might be, as a quarterback yourself? And
Yeah. Well, look.
I think you're talking about a policy quarterback or a political quarterback. Okay, good. All right.
It can be a congressman. It doesn't have to be. Jack Kemp was a backbencher congressman. He wasn't on the right committees. He didn't have great seniority. In fact, Jimmy, you should talk about that.
Well, it's an interesting point because, look, governing is challenging. President Trump is running up against all sorts of headwinds, not only the ones that are constantly in the press about Russia and the other things, but he's got these huge challenges around healthcare, tax policy. There's welfare reform. and obviously we have a new era in foreign policy with the war on terror that has been a really huge challenge since 9/11. The thing that Dad did was, from the backbenches, from the minority of Congress, he chartered a course that brought Democrats and Republicans, but Dad really wanted to win people on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah, talk about how he worked with Democrats.
Well, you know, it didn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. And back then, remember, in the 70s, when my father was in Congress, members moved to where their job was. So I was born in Buffalo in 1971. My father was elected in 1970. They moved to Bethesda, Maryland, which is where I grew up. And other members moved their families here. And yes, they went back to the district. The members did. But Sam Nunn's Democratic senator from Georgia, his family grew up down the block. And there would be discussions at barbecues in people's backyards, in our dining room. There were discussions about policies, and the guy or woman wasn't a Democrat. They were a fellow politician. And Dad wanted to convince them of his perspective. And today, part of the reason that doesn't exist is because in 94, when the Republicans took control of Congress, they won on an anti-Washington message. And that's not a long-term strategy. They told their new members to keep the family in the district, come to DC for 3 or 4 days a week, and then go back to your district. And Speaker Gingrich and Leader DeLay, that was part of the way that they were going to keep discipline in the caucus. And I think it hurt.
So by running against Washington, they destroyed Washington?
I think that, I mean,
That's interesting.
look, I don't think
That's an
Washington was
interesting
destroyed,
idea.
but I think it had
But
a really negative
you get
impact.
congressmen living on cots rather than
Which is not
socializing
healthy.
with each other
It's
and
not
getting to know
human
each other.
flourishing, is it, Bill?
Not my view.
Talk
of
about
human
your
flourishing.
understanding of human flourishing and your work on
Starts
that.
out with a cot in my office on Capitol Hill and eating cold pizza for breakfast.
goodness.
How's that?
Yeah.
So you think the culture is, that's one of the cultural shifts in Washington you've seen as somebody growing up in the family business or in the...
Certainly. Today, families don't get to know each other. And when they walk the halls of Congress, there's not that personal relationship where, they were either having a drink or a meal with the family, and they could talk about that before talking about issues on which they disagreed. At the Jack Kemp Foundation, our main program area is called the Kemp Forum. We want it to be a debate and discussion series, providing a platform for the civil competition of ideas. And we do need more civility. We need more ideas. We need people who want not just to build agreement within their own party. We want people who want to convince and win folks who right now are on the other side.
Is Kemp for an event, or is it a process, or is it a...
The Kemp Forum is, we do have a process that we've designed. We kind of have a long-term plan that we're building up to.
Good.
But what we've had recently are a bunch of Kemp Forum events. We cover economic policy, foreign policy, and importantly, and you alluded to this earlier, equality of opportunity. You can't talk about economic growth
Right.
without helping people understand that true economic growth comes when there is equality of opportunity. And my dad understood that from his sports background. And one of the most powerful narratives that had an impact on him was the parable of the Good Shepherd, who left the 99 to go find the lost lamb. And in this country, if we're willing to write off a percentage of the people, then that's damaging to the soul of this nation. And our better angels call us to go find those people, give them equality of opportunity. And so we do a lot of events specifically in DC, but also helping conservatives and liberals talk about how to fight poverty in a way that actually
And that's so
helps
important.
people
We had a
flourish.
guy who wrote off 47%, and that didn't work out too well for him.
If I can just interrupt you for
Sure.
a second, and Jack Kemp inspired me into politics. He was the force that shanghaied me into this life. I'm still deciding
I'm
whether
sorry,
to forgive
Ralph.
him.
What was your alternative path? That's hard to imagine. He kept you off the tennis tour.
But after Jack left public service, after he left the Congress, after he left Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and became a beloved party elder statesman, okay, we supply-siders, we proud, we few, we Michiganers, used to just shake our heads because we could never get him out of retirement. He'd gone back to the private sector and the think tank sector and so forth. But anytime any African American asked him to do something for their organization, to be there, he did it. He walked the walk. This was not rhetoric. We have a lot of Republicans who talk about the need for outreach or messaging or what.
Only in the election year.
Only every 2 or 4 years, right? Yeah. Jack Kemp lived by this code.
Yeah.
Okay? He played football with African Americans, and they became a band of brothers. And I remember a story, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The team was traveling somewhere, and they said, okay, well, your black players have to stay here.
It was in New Orleans.
No, okay, you tell the story because, okay. The black players get to play here, you get to stay at this hotel out at the fringe of town, and you guys all get to stay in this hotel. And Jack Kemp said, no.
Well, actually, so the black guys didn't like it, led by Cookie Gilchrist, who was an all-star running back for the Buffalo Bills in the 60s. And this was an all-star team for the American Football League in 1964 playing in New Orleans. They go down to New Orleans, they're in separate hotels, and the final straw was actually a cab driver who Cookie hailed, and he said, "Hey, this is not a colored cab." And Cookie said, "I don't care what color the cab is. I just want to get to the club." And so that was one of the final straws. And that night, the black guys got together and they said, "Hey, we don't want to play in New Orleans. They've separated us by hotel, and we can't get a cab to the club."
Right.
And they told the white guys, they said, "Hey, we're going to bail." And Dad agreed with some other guys who said, "You know what? We're going to support this, and we're going to tell the commissioner that we're not going to play the game." The commissioner then moved the game to Houston. But that was a formative experience because Dad grew up in California, and I want to give Speaker Ryan credit here because after he was a part of Romney-Ryan in 2012 and lost, one of the most inspiring parts of the campaign was when he did outreach to African Americans, and we helped put together an event in Cleveland where he did a backstage roundtable with a bunch of community leaders who were working on drug addiction issues and helping people get out of poverty, which is hard, person-to-person work. And after they lost the election, he called me up and said, "Jimmy, I want you and Bob Woodson from the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise to set up a listening tour for me." And it wasn't just an election year. He did that, and he does truly care about equality of opportunity and addressing the racial challenges that we have.
Jack Kemp had an empowerment zone,
Enterprise zone,
yeah.
and President Clinton
which is
bastardized
empowerment.
No.
Could have been.
This is important to understand. Enterprise zones remember there were redlined areas that banks would have in cities, and they'd say, "You can't lend here. Don't lend here. This is a bad investment," right? So there were literally red lines on maps that banks had, and that became known. And my dad and a Democrat, Bob Garcia from New York, they came up with this enterprise zone idea where they looked at the red lines on these maps and said, what if we turn these red lines into green lines and we zeroed out the capital gains tax for any company, any investment firm that wants to go in and invest in a business inside this line, zero out the capital gains tax.
No property taxes, no income tax, nothing.
Right. And zero it out and then see what happens. Let the market work. Let's get money in there. And there's no tax coming out of that, so you're not going to lose revenue. And you're going to create owners, you're going to create employees. And so it never got passed, although the bill was introduced. President Clinton smartly, politically co-opted a conservative growth idea and he created tax credits for those green lines. But tax credits operate differently than zeroing out the capital gains tax. And it's the government picking winners and losers. It can work. It did have a positive
What's the
impact.
difference?
Well, a tax credit is if you go in and invest in a business inside this depressed area, then we will give you a tax credit, but you have to meet these certain criteria, right? So the new market tax credit is an example. There's low-income housing tax credits, and those can get bundled and sold on the market. But again, tax credits are beneficiary. They benefit the wealthy who have the ability to already do this, as opposed to really getting the money to the people who have the ideas for businesses. I've got a guy in Southeast DC, Ron Moten, who is working with inner city kids on helping them develop businesses, and he needs capital. He needs people who are interested in investing. But that was the idea. So, but a lot of people think that empowerment zones was Kemp's idea. Dad always bristled at
What do you
that.
think? What do you think he'd be taking up today? I mean, the landscape's very different. We don't have inflation.
Well, look,
we don't. You know, it's
I
our
know.
misery index. Although people still aren't
can I
feeling
just
that happy.
interrupt
let
that
me,
question?
No, let me answer the question, Ralph. The misery index
told me I
now is
could interrupt.
what's in inflation? 2%.
Yes.
And
Well,
unemployment
less.
technically is 4%. So we somehow don't have that same misery
I've
index.
stipulated to that. I said the circumstances are presenting problems are different. There's stagnation.
Okay,
they're
now
not
it's your turn.
stagflation.
It's your turn, Ralph.
Well, I just wanted to see you've destroyed my moment. Thank you very much, because Jimmy just opened the door to a very important other factor.
Okay, I want to
about
keep that
human
door open.
flourishing,
Keep
okay?
going. Yeah.
And that is, Kemp was selected by George H.W. Bush to become his Secretary of Housing and Urban Development,
Right.
right?
Which he didn't want to take, by the way.
But
That's another story.
but he had heart. So I remember reading the New York Times story of the interview when he was a newly fledged HUD secretary, okay? And one of the striking factors is Jack had not one, but two busts of Abraham Lincoln in his office.
Yes.
And I wanted to bring this back to the GOP was created, it's the party of Lincoln.
Yes.
It was created by Abraham Lincoln to abolish slavery, to oppose slavery. It is the party of human dignity in its origin. And to me, it was just a fascinating story that Jimmy was telling before we went on the air about how the Kemp Foundation did a Kemp Forum at what Jimmy called Abraham Lincoln's Camp David. And I just wanted to open the door to that for a minute so that he could tell, because there's this profound spiritual, I'm going to use the word unflinchingly, connection between Lincoln and Kemp. And the Kemp Foundation channeled that at an event that was really very fascinating.
Well, and look, all of us have flaws, and I'm gonna get to that right here after I tell the HUD story, because when my dad was named HUD secretary by President H.W. Bush, he had just lost the primary to H.W. He ran in the Republican primary in '88, lost to not only H.W. Bush, but to Pat Robertson, Pete DuPont, Bob Dole, and a bunch of others. He was really discouraged. He believed that he was
Not many supply-siders in that bunch.
no. He believed that he was the heir to the Reagan legacy, and he really wanted to be president of the United States. When he lost, and President H.W. Bush, who had called supply-side economics voodoo economics, won and was asked to become HUD secretary, my father's aspiration was to be Treasury secretary. That's where he wanted to go.
He would have been a good one.
And he was talking to my mother and said, I don't want to be HUD secretary. And to my mom's credit, she said, Jack, if you don't take this job, then all the urban opportunities, economic growth for all of that part of your career will be forgotten. this is your opportunity. And so Dad became a HUD secretary who had his own economic policy, his own foreign policy.
He got teased about this by
Jim Baker.
But Jim Baker,
Jim
chief
Baker
of
didn't
staff,
like
said,
that.
"You're the only HUD secretary that has, in addition to having a housing policy, has an economic policy and a foreign policy." Jack.
I get the first two, the foreign policy we need to get.
Well, yeah, that's
was a
another
joke,
story.
yeah, but-
So at the Kemp Foundation, we wanted to carry forward Dad's political optimism. And you're right, Ralph, the Lincoln Cottage here in Northeast DC is a place that we chose as a venue.
Would you describe what it is?
It's where President Lincoln went during the summer because the White House wasn't air conditioned.
Where is it in DC right now?
It's up North Capitol Street in Northeast DC, and it's called, many people know it as the Old Soldiers Home. And
So
it's a veterans,
just a couple miles from the White House.
yeah, it's 2 or 3 miles from
Yeah,
the White House, just north of Catholic University.
Sure.
Beautiful campus, by the way.
There's a cottage there where the Lincolns lived, and it's been restored by the Park Service, and they rent it out. So we rented out Lincoln's bedroom where he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, and we had a Kemp Forum on the future of the American idea. And we did it at Lincoln Cottage because the roots of the Republican Party are, as Ralph talked about, and Republicans have got to do a better job reaching out to all sorts of minorities. Blacks, Latinos, Asians. This country is e pluribus unum, out of many one. And Dad's background in football especially, it taught him what teamwork is and how you are to go after the people who haven't been included and bring them in. And so you've got to address that first before you talk about budget issues. You can solve
Jack
budget
Kemp
issues
once said, "Nobody cares how much you know."
so they know how much you care.
Bingo. Brains, heart, and courage.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that drives me. I don't know what it drives me to exactly, but we think we've got good policies that are supply side policies. We think we know how to drive economy. We think we can get to 4% growth,
Yeah.
and we think it's good for all people.
Yes.
And yet, it's characterized as something just the opposite, as something just for the rich and only for the few that in the elites. How do you take that message and translate it into something that's resonating with ordinary people? Because you're right, we're not doing a good job.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we all agree you've got to go into places where Republicans haven't gone. You need to be in the inner cities. You need to be in rural areas, and give President Trump. Give President Trump credit, when he was campaigning, he was opening up conversations with people who hadn't been engaged. And that is what Republicans need to do. There's a lesson to be learned there, and going out and talking to people about the challenges that they face, that they see on a daily basis, and providing hope.
Maybe that's happening in the state houses more than it's happening in Congress. Because when I look at Congress, I look at a bunch of lawyers and legislatures who don't know anything about economic growth and optimism, or a handful. That's a sweeping generalization,
No,
but I mean,
it's
largely.
It's right, but I want to contextualize it. Okay. Congress is a reactive body. Think of it as a big banjo. Okay. They get played, and I mean that in the positive sense, not in a snarky sense. There were two members of Congress who, more than anybody else, transformed the world in my lifetime. One was Jack Kemp. Before Jack Kemp started selling his model of lower marginal tax rates and a higher integrity dollar, a dollar as good as gold, 80% of the world lived in dire poverty. It's now 10%. The world economy has blossomed, but only after Jack Kemp said, "Don't do it that way. We know you're well intended. It just doesn't work. Do it this way." There was and not just in the United States. I mean, it was massive in the United States, although we kind of lost the thread about 17 years ago and have been wandering around outside of the Kemp model. And the economy has been growing at only half of its historic trend rate.
And that's when George W. Bush became
That
president.
includes George W. Bush and extends it through Barack Obama. If the economy was growing at Jack Kemp rates instead of George W. Bush, Barack Obama rates, we would all be somewhere between 30 and 50% richer.
Well, let me
now,
push on that,
through
though.
compound
I mean,
interest.
you're equating supply-side tax policy with all this growth or lack of growth. I mean, certainly there are other
Yes,
factors.
with all of the growth. The supply side policies correlate brilliantly with 4% growth. We've been going through 1.5 or 2% growth for 17 years. I call it the little dark age, as we've deviated from those policies, as we left them. George W. Bush wanted to do it his way. He did. We got boom, we got bust, we got boom, we got bust. And then we got this long, ultra slow punk recovery under Obama. When you add it all up, our income, your income, my income, and the national income is somewhere between 30% and 50% lower than it would be if things had grown on
Okay, well,
trend line.
these are all, but I'm inclined, I'm basically a business guy. I'm looking for a line of action.
Right.
Here we are in 2017.
Yes.
Okay, we've got 17 years of catastrophic policy. What are the three things you'd put in place to bring about what it would be leading us toward the Valhalla of economic growth?
Yeah. Well, look, economic determinism is not the end-all be-all. But if you don't have economic growth, Bill, as we all know, if you don't have economic growth, you can't solve a lot of the challenges that we face.
And you can't pay for any of the programs that people
You
want.
can't pay for, and our demographics don't look great,
No.
right? But the innovations that we see coming from the private sector, the technological innovations, they're incredible, and the potential for growth is there. But there are some real challenges. So we have got to get people back to a culture of aspiration. I think one of the main problems, my wife and I have 4 boys, and we want to see a culture of aspiration return to this country where it seems that there's more of a culture of expectation. Where my 4 children, boy, I'm really working to get them to aspire to accomplish things instead of sitting on their devices. It's a broad generalization, and there is a lot that can be done on devices, but I want them thinking about all the things that are possible, not just the latest social media of what their friends are doing, right? So I think it's important that there's a cultural understanding that in this country, in our education system, where we need free enterprise, free market forces at work, delivering, training people for the jobs of the future, not the jobs of the past. And we need to be a country that embraces people with capacity, right? We need to be the engine for the world. And so, first of all, we've got to get our tax policy right. And it's not easy to do, but you've got to get our tax policy right. Certainly trade policy is important.
Tax policy right means low flat tax across the board.
I wouldn't say a flat tax across the board, because you do get into the Warren Buffett problem where you're taxing Warren Buffett at a lower tax rate than his secretary. So a flat tax has some challenges to it. We think that there are solutions. John Mueller, an economist who Ralph and I are friends with.
Used to be Jack's chief economist when Jack was head of the conference.
John has a proposal called the Fair and Simple Tax that taxes labor capital and investment capital at the same rate. I think it's a great idea that's worth discussion, and we haven't had a lot of success, to Ralph's point, we haven't had a lot of success on the Hill getting that into the conversation. But it's a critical point to understand that labor capital and investment capital are labor capital is preferred by the Democrats. So when they're in control, they advantage labor capital.
Right,
So
they
we're
cut taxes on
we're
labor.
talking wages versus capital gains and capital gains?
Yeah,
Is
and
that the-
it should be equalized, but you don't want Warren Buffett paying a lower tax rate. So having a sound, stable,
That's a good talking point, but that Berkshire Hathaway has had a tax plan in place for the last 40, 50 years that he's paid no taxes at all.
Bill,
Corporate-
look, I hate to be the skunk at the garden party on taxes, okay? Because I know all Republicans doctrinally want to cut tax rates, okay? There's a big difference between cutting tax rates and cutting taxes, for one thing. You can actually raise taxes by cutting rates. But we are the victim of our own success here. Thanks to Jack Kemp, the top marginal tax rate has come down from 70 to 39.6. He actually brought it all the way down to 28, but then Clinton popped it up to 39.6. I wish it was still at 28. But the fact is, the most they're talking about on Capitol Hill is bringing it from 39.6 to 35. There is a difference.
That's not going to make any difference.
There's a difference, right?
That's small ball. That's not going to make a bit of
supercharge the
difference.
economy.
Well, let me just throw something back at you guys, because we talk about rates. You know, part of my job in the transition, helping with Trump putting together action plans for the agencies, was to talk to the people at the Internal Revenue Service, and we all have our own personal thoughts about the IRS. And
I love them. In case you're watching.
In case you're watching.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
I'll say even more. I visited with all the top people, and they're lovely people.
Yes.
And I said, okay, so what would be the one thing that we could do that you think the tax side could do to stimulate growth and to make the IRS a better player in American life? And they said, simplify the tax code. Mm-hmm. I mean, every time they say something gets thrown in that's some new good idea from Congress, it throws them into a paroxysm change. Could you pronounce that word for me, Ralph?
Paroxysm.
Paroxysm, thank you. I know you could. And when we talk about rates, I think we ought to be talking about the whole tax code.
Yes.
Because that's the thing that's really unfair.
I'm sorry, that is not the secret sauce now. I know, we all love it.
Okay, Ralph, we've got 4 minutes left. What's the secret sauce?
The secret sauce is, okay. My secret sauce is to make the dollar as good as gold.
Okay.
Okay, that said,
Isn't there some horrifying statistic that when Nixon took the dollar off of the gold standard in 1974?
median family income went from this to this.
For those that are not watching, listening, the growth rate dropped from 3-4% went to flatline.
Flatlined.
And we've seen family income flatline for 50 years.
Median
60
family
years,
income flat, which had been growing steadily and in accord with the wealthy, went flat and has never consistently recovered. And the income of the rich people took off like a hockey stick.
Yeah.
August 15th, 1971. You could look it up.
So your big thing is getting back to the gold standard, and the statistics are there.
And if you look at there, but that's not why I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. I'm here to talk about the pursuit of happiness and human flourishing.
That was the gold standard.
And that's just like tax reform. That's an instrumentality. For people to grow year after year, Einstein famously never said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest.
He didn't say that.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
Einstein famously never said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. If all of us are growing at 4% a year instead of 1.5% a year, we double our wealth.
I think the numbers are, if you're growing at 4%, you can double your household wealth in about 15 years.
Right.
If you're growing at 1.5%, it takes 75 years.
Right.
Or some ridiculous.
So you can double your household worth in 3 times during your life at 4%, 3 to 4 times instead of less than 1. Right. But the point that I am most passionate about, Bill, is we need the next Kemp. None of this happens spontaneously. There's an old saying in politics, spontaneous as arson. There are plenty of good ideas. What we need is a new quarterback to pull them all together, to focus the team, to force the GOP, as Jack Kemp did, to talk about the pursuit of happiness, which means human flourishing, which means equitable prosperity. We can pull together the half a dozen best ideas. In fact, maybe there should be a Kemp forum on it as to how to get to 4% economic growth that are innovative, not retreads of tax and regulation. Yeah, that too. Okay. But among other things, we have a new generation that needs to take power. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're the old Bolsheviks here. We lived through this.
Well, maybe you are.
We lived through the supply side.
I'm the old robber baron or something like
okay, fine. We lived through the 70s, which were much worse than today. And thanks to the political leadership of Jack Kemp, we turned it around and we spread worldwide prosperity. But we're old and tired now. And we need, young bucks like Jimmy Kemp to be stepping to the fore and saying, what's it your father said? He was in a football game and
in a huddle?
In a huddle, and he said, let's get this over with.
Oh.
and went on to win the game, and I think the championship.
One of the important things I think, Bill, is yes, there's a right policy mix. I do want to get in that the unfinished business of supply side economics is getting to a sound dollar. And that discussion hasn't happened enough. It's interesting that there's a potential new nominee to
Is
the
a
Fed.
sound dollar the same thing as the gold standard?
Well, I think there are probably there are different ways to get there, to
Yeah.
get to a sound dollar. But I think the conversation needs to happen. And we have a Kemp forum on exchange rates and the dollar. And it's something that we're trying to facilitate. We've had one event on this issue.
It was huge, by the way.
So even if we don't go back to a gold standard, we need to do something about the Fed and the monetary policy
Yeah, I mean, back in the 80s,
and Treasury.
you had what was it, the Paris Accord?
The
Paris
Louvre
Accord,
Accord. You had the Louvre Accord. You had this stabilizing of exchange rates. So we need to get a sound dollar.
You didn't have the stabilizing exchange rates. We had stable exchange rates. Okay, you don't stay. You want, when you're driving, money is just a bridge between two people doing business. You want a solid, reliable bridge. You don't want a floating bridge or a sinking bridge or a kind of semi-stable bridge.
Right.
You want a rock solid bridge, and that's what our money needs to be.
That's
if
what our
we are
money
gonna
needs to be. And
flourish.
it's the same principle, what you were talking about with the IRS. We need a stable tax code that people understand and they know what to expect. And business says, okay, hey, we're going to bring that money back in. So certainly we do need to get money back in from overseas.
Well, that's a point that needs made not only with taxes but with regulation. It's not the regulation per se; it's the fact they change every 3 weeks.
Yes, but also, look, the Republican Party loves deregulation, and God bless them, but it's not an orphan issue. A good money, a good dollar, a dollar as good as gold, however you get there, is the orphan issue. Okay, there's plenty of people out there avidly deregulating, and I say, go to it, kids. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of people who don't.
Well, there are a lot of people out there talking about it, but there's not many people who are actually doing it.
Well, at least they're talking about it, okay? And there's a lot of people out there, God bless you, we're the victims of our own success on the war, on the tax war. We basically won that. Could it be better? Yes. Should it be better? Yes. Do I support it being better? Yes. But the orphan issue is the integrity of the dollar.
Okay, that sounds like a final word.
No, Jimmy gets the last
Jimmy
word.
does get the final word, Ralph.
Well, Bill, I just appreciate your passion for common ground and human flourishing, because that's what our founders
We need to get
intended.
there.
They wanted this place,
That's what I mean. Yeah, go ahead.
this place to be an island in the world where people could come and there was a common ground, universal rights that come from nature's creator, and that this was a level playing field. So our policies should follow that guiding star, right? And the American idea is about maximizing human flourishing. It's not just for Americans, it's for all people. That's who we have to be. We need simple, limited government that people can understand, and we have to pursue justice for all. We have to care about everybody. And I think one of my dad's lasting impacts on me and what we're trying to do at the foundation is help people see how important it is to go after the lost sheep and care for them, bring them in, but make sure that they have an opportunity not to be taken care of, but to earn their own success.
Your dad was not only a great statesman, he was a great father. I feel like his spirit's sitting right here in the room with us, and
Thanks.
that's great.
He was a great father, and I'm very fortunate.
How do we find out more about the Kemp Foundation?
So we're at jackkempfoundation.org, and we've got a book called The American Idea Renewed, that is a collection of my dad's best speeches and includes our Kemp Forum on the American Idea at Lincoln Cottage. We have a rapporteur's report on that, and then some other essays from friends of the foundation. You can find that on our website. And then my dad's books are, I'm sure you can get them on eBay or wherever, An American Renaissance and The American Idea.
I think they're still on Amazon.
Bill?
Ralph, where can we find you?
Google.com, Ralph Benko. And I've published something like 1 million words over the last 5 years. at Forbes.com, at thegoldstandardnow.org, at National.
But it sounds like if we really
Pulse.
wanted to drill in on your idea, it's the gold standard that people ought to be taking a fresh look at.
I'm passionate about the gold standard. I'm passionate about the Centennial Monetary Commission, which was just passed by the House and is pending in the Senate, to look at all the different ways we can get to it.
Where would we find out about the Centennial Monetary Commission?
You would go to Google and you would Google congress.gov HR 10, and then you would look at section 1011 and you would read a whole section about the Centennial Monetary Commission. But just take it save yourself a lot of wonk work. Take it from me and say, I think I'd like to call my senator, since it's through Congress, and tell him what a great thing I think the Centennial Monetary Commission is, or what a terrible thing if that's what they think. But it comes down to humanity. Okay, policy comes from brains, heart, and courage. And on this day, Bill, I would like to salute you and raise a toast to the memory of Jack Kemp and
To Jack Kemp.
a toast to Jack Kemp and human flourishing.
There we go.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We'll have you back soon.
Thanks, Bill.
To be continued.
Great to be with you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Want more? Be sure to subscribe to Common Ground with Bill Walton on iTunes.